Good evening, everyone. My name is Robert Gordon. I'm the president of the Chevy Chase Communities Association. And I want to thank our panelists for showing up this evening. And I want to thank the audience. We have a great turnout. I didn't realize we were going up against the Golden Globes. As a movie lover, I've decided to have that recorded. I hope for other movie lovers, you do the same thing. I'd like to start out by introducing Peter Gosselin. Peter is the ANC 34G commissioner for 3G06. He's the co-chair of the ANC's Zoning Design and Development Committee. Peter is the co-moderator for this meeting, and I'd like to throw it over to him at this time.
Thank you, Robert, and thanks to the panelists for coming tonight. Let me start by apologizing for my Texas Chainsaw Massacre look. I just had cataract surgery, and I'm told I have to wear this get-up until for 36 hours. Tonight, we're going to delve into some pretty nitty-gritty stuff to try to understand a process that this community was just introduced to in the midst of the holidays in November and December, the surplus and disposition process, the city's surplus and disposition process. I'm on first blush and probably on second and third and fourth look, it's an insane process. You'll discover this if you haven't already when you go to Thursday's hearing being conducted by the city, where you will be asked to comment on the abstract notion of surplusing or making available for sale or long-term lease to private players a portion not defined of the community of our community center library site. There are a lot of reasons to be upset with being asked that question, but I don't think we should not lose sight of the broader issues here. And I think there are at least three of them. The first is that this community has said for a long time, and the ANCs for several years back, 6 years back, have been working on trying to replace what are old and inadequate public facilities with the community center and the library. The second is that a series of ANCs, and I don't want to front run the new ANC that just sat, but has said that besides pursuing our self-interest, we believe this community, or a majority of this community, wants to pursue a public interest, a public good in providing affordable housing and workforce housing, including at this site. And the third is that the city seems hell-bent on running this process itself, even though we have made clear we are interested in doing both public good and self-interested things. I think where that drives me, and I hope it drives most of this audience, is that tonight we need to be looking for ways to get our voices heard in the process. Outrage is good. Outrage can get us some part of the way, but we need to understand the process enough to figure out how do we intersect with it. And with that, I'll turn it back to Robert.
Good. For me, the most important goal of the meeting is to provide knowledge so that all of you can participate well prepared in the Thursday, September 12th DMPED hearing on the fate of the site. To date, the DMPED has proposed a surplus and development model to develop the site. We think that this means giving over to the site to a developer to develop it. Perhaps there are other models that can be used to develop the site. At a minimum, we need lots of dialogue to attempt to arrive at a meeting of the minds. I encourage everyone to go to that September 12th meeting and to speak frankly and candidly.
January 12th.
The January, yes.
September.
January 12th meeting, and to speak frankly and candidly. You have the power to be a force in the community. Now I'd like to introduce the panelists for this informational meeting. They were chosen because they have a range of expertise on the topic at hand. First is Maximilian Tondro. Max Tondro is the chief of the Equitable Land Use section of the Office of the Attorney General for the District of Columbia. He provides expertise on Law 10801 that governs disposition of real government property. And that's a huge element of what we're going to be talking about tonight. Second in order is Caitlin Cocilova, I hope I pronounced that right, is the legislative counsel on the Committee on Housing under Chair Councilmember Robert C. White Jr., who's the chair. Councilmember White's office is working on revising the disposal law through an initiative called the Common Ground Act. And we'll hear more about that later. And third is Avram Fechter from a different side of the equation. Avi is a co-founder of Equity Plus, which works with investors and project developers to structure, underwrite, close, develop, and manage tax advantage development projects across the country. This is a very important element of this discussion. Prior to that, Avi worked for the DC government on low-income housing tax credit programs. So with that, I'd like to start asking some of the questions. So Max, please explain to our large group, we have about 150 people now, Code 1081 law. How does the surplus and disposal process work?
Yes, pardon me. Good evening, everybody. At a sort of 30,000 feet in the air view, there's a division between the surplus determination by the district that there is property or a real estate interest that is the first that has to be determined. First of all, that is no longer needed for public use. Once that determination is made, then there is a process that goes to council for their determination. Then at that point, it is there is a the process switches over to the disposition side, and the disposition is the determination again requiring council approval, but led by DMPED, the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development, on behalf of the administration, of first of all determining the public policy remit for the redevelopment through an RFP, a request for proposals, and then reviewing the results, the proposals that are received for that proposed development, and then making that recommendation to council for their final approval as to the disposition of those of the particular real estate interest that is there. There is opportunity for public comment as both part of the surplus. That's what will happen on Thursday, and then also after the surplus determination and before the RFP goes out, there's another opportunity for public comment, and then finally there will be the result of DMPED's determination and recommendation to council as well. That's another opportunity for folks to weigh in.
Hold it. You're on mute, Robert.
I'd like to follow up on that. You said that the determination is based on property that's no longer required for public purpose. You also, in advance of the meeting, say you didn't want to get into the nitty-gritty of the community center library site, but just in general, not talking about that site, but in general, a site that is fully utilized, like the site we're talking about, And I know that site, it's only a few blocks from my house. I use it for all kinds of purposes. How can DEMPED say that this property is not, or any property, I'm talking in general, any property like that is not no longer required for public purpose?
I think that's a great question. I mean, I think the way of thinking about it is that it is not saying, and I think in this case it's underscored in the public notice announcement, the public hearing announcement, that it is a portion of the property that is no longer needed for public use. And that is because the community, in this case, community center and the library, or in other cases, whether it's a police substation or a fire station, that there is the what is being disposed of is the other buildable area on that lot, with the reservation of that public facility, of that public use, whether it's a library, FEMS station, or a police substation. This is oftentimes an opportunity for the district to take land, an asset that needs to be redeveloped, and to take the advantage of the fact that there is value in the land, and to use that to pay for the redevelopment of that facility. Again, a school, a library, a fire or police station, and also at the same time to reach other public policy goals like affordable housing and so forth.
Let me pick up.
Go ahead, Peter.
Okay, let me say first to the audience, Robert and I will ask some questions, but then we'll start looking at the Q&A and bringing people up if they want to speak, get on camera. I want to pose this to Caitlin, and my hope, Caitlin, my understanding is that Councilmember White's staff had to basically look at the entire city law, because as I read the Common Ground Act or Amendment of 2022, which is the council members, is essentially a redrafting of the whole law, if I understand it correctly. Do you understand that it is surplusing necessary for any kind of development on the site, or is the fact that the deputy mayor for planning and economic development is coming with a surplus proposal, does that tell us something about the track they're running down to do this proposal?
Thanks for that question. I'll start first of all, by saying, hi, everyone. It's very weird not being able to see the 160 people that are here. So I've been like scrolling back and forth to look through names and see who I know. And I do see some familiar names, and that is grounding for me. So it's really nice to see some people on here that I know. Nice to meet those of you who I haven't had a chance to yet. My background, just again, so we're all on the same page. Before coming to this office, I worked for the Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless as an attorney and organizer, with a focus on land use and how the distribution of land has an impact on housing instability and homelessness. So part of that work was actually studying these processes, and it was very cool to come to an office and know that this was something that they were also planning to work on. So I'm really grateful to be in this space today. To your question, I'm going to speak generally as well, similar to what Max said, but from my personal experience and studying kind of surplus and disposition in the past, and part of the reason why Common Ground has been introduced is because by the time council gets the proposals, or by the time there are the meetings on surplus and on disposition, the plans have been somewhat baked, but in practice. That doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't room for adjustments, and that doesn't mean that there aren't adjustments that are made, but that's what I have seen in my personal and past work, and that's what we've seen on council too. So Robert White was the chairperson of the Government Operations and Facilities Committee, that is the committee that does oversee the surplus portion of this process. And through that, that was the pattern that we were seeing. And we were also seeing a lack of an ability for communities to meaningfully engage in that process and to make some of those changes. So as we looked at the Common Ground Act, to your point, Peter, we did have to take a look at the entirety of the law. Part of that was because some provisions had been outdated, and so we had to maneuver them in order to update them in a way that would read well. And some of them were to shift up this process to make sure that there was adequate community engagement along the way.
Okay, to either you, Caitlin, or to Max, I mean, I think one of the things that bothers people here is the order doesn't seem to make any sense. We're being asked to speak on an issue of that which has no substance. Is it required by the law that the city make a decision about surplusing before they send out a request for proposals of what we might do there? I mean, it seems to me crazy that they can't do that. I don't understand. It would seem to me that in effect, it would mean that the city has to say what it's willing to give away before it looks at how much interest there is in doing something, and sort of then being able to judge of how much it has to give away to get the development it wants. Does the law require surplusing in all development cases, and does it require surplusing before the city, hopefully with input from this community, gets a request for proposal out? To either of you. Max, you want to go first?
Sure. So I think the concept is that, first of all, the public use is determined, and that is to say, what is there a public use left of that on that property, or is there a property or a portion of it that is no longer serving a public use? And then the concept of the law as it exists is, once that is occurs, then there is the planning going forward that looks to what the proposed use of the site will be, I should say. And so if you look at the law itself, there is particularly a provision, I think the one that's probably most apt here is the one that requires that the mayor shall hold a public hearing between a determination that a property or a portion of it is surplus and the time that they move on to negotiate a disposition of real property. So they're trying to get a public hearing on how the public use, or what the proposed use of the property would be, as opposed to necessarily the public use. So I guess the distinction that I see in the act as it currently exists, and is the fact that there is, first of all, this determination: is there a use that is still is the property still completely needing to be used for public uses, or is there a portion of it that can be disposed? Once that's determined, whatever portion that is, then there is a call for a specific public hearing for community comment on how that portion that is no longer needed should be disposed of. If that answers your question there, I think.
Let me try one more time. Is there any maneuvering room here? I mean, maybe this is the process that is generally contemplated by the law. Maybe this is the process the city has used. Is it required to use it? Because again, we in this community are being confronted with a ridiculous question, which is, we have an active site fully used for public purposes. We want to do more with it, but we're being asked whether some of it isn't necessary. It would be a much easier question to answer if somebody could see what the extra stuff might look like, but we can't get to that unless we get a request for proposal out. Can the city put out a request for proposal without going through this process?
I mean, I suppose they could put out a request. Obviously, if a developer who would respond would want to, that's going to require an expenditure of money. They would want to know before they expend the money on plans or concepts for redevelopment, they would want to know, are they going to develop, you know, a 10-story building or a 1-story building? And so that is, I think, where you're dealing with the disposal, the surplus process before the disposition, because first is really determining what it is that is available to be developed, right? What is that portion of the property that needs to be maintained as for public use, and what is the portion of the property that can be developed otherwise? So I think there's certainly the practice has been that the RFP as such follows and it's separate. Maybe in theory you could do a proposal for interest or expression of interest. I'm not sure that developers necessarily would respond to that. Is one of the other concerns, but I think that's a sort of a slightly different issue there. But I think the concept is really to separate what is needed to be maintained for public use and what is no longer needed, and then to once that is determined, then to move on and have expressions or proposals based on that.
Let me just ask one other question here, and this is a question that we have been told. That are we the first community? Let me back up. My understanding is that this problem has vexed council members for some time. This problem of the city coming in with a surplus and disposition agreement, all packaged up, and saying to the council, guys, you touch a hair on the head of this proposal and the developer walks. And so the council has wanted to pull these apart. Are we the first community that has dealt with the question of a surplus only? I'm trying to address the question of the concept of surplusing or partially surplusing without having anything around, anything wrapped around it, like a proposal.
I want to make sure I fully understand the question, but I will say, no, I mean, this isn't new, like to your point, like this is not new at all. And there are plenty of examples. For example, in 2018, I think there was a hearing on the surplus and disposition of the Cromell School in Ward 5. The community themselves actually participated in our RFP process, and they partnered with W.C. Smith as a developer. They said, this is what we want. And actually, ironically, it was also, they wanted a rec center. They wanted play space for the youth. And a different proposal was chosen, and there was no, from the community's perspective, there was no real explanation as to why another proposal was chosen. During that hearing, there was information that came out, and I remember preparing testimony for it and found that in the past 6 months, there were something like 90 plus properties that were in the surplus and disposition process across the city. So this isn't new at all. And I'm sure that there have been a lot of communities who have been trying to understand this, just like those on the call today. Unfortunately, I don't know if there have been 167 people in Zoom before the surplus hearing, but I think this speaks to, you know, why it's important to make sure that people do have an understanding of how this process works.
Can I something's been troubling me from the first hearing that DMPED put on, and that was, they seem to conclude that surplus and disposition is the only model that they are going to consider. Is that the only model for getting a development done in the District of Columbia? In other words, can the district use its own resources to build out a new community center, a new library, and in addition to that, housing? Is there a community trust type of operation that could do the same thing? Why is it that now I know this, I'm not trying to be argumentative, I'm just trying to find facts, because a lot of people have been asking this question. Is there a way another way to go about this? Caitlin, you've seen.
Sure, I can take a stab at it. I don't know. I mean, I think it depends on what the proposal is. So I would really have to look at the financials. This is the great mystery of development, period. What is actually possible? What are the monetary costs of the development? How much of, and I know Avi, you can come in and be like, well, I know way more about this, but what are the actual costs? What are going to be the profit margins? How much are we going to be able to produce in terms of affordable housing? What subsidies are going to be necessary? And I'll just speak for myself. Like, I'm excited to be part of the housing committee now and dive deeper into the financials, because there are a ton of tools that we can use to develop not just housing, but whatever the needs are for a particular community. And from what I've seen, this is a big one that has been used a lot in the city so far. At least in the past, 10, 20 years, but we really do have a variety of tools and resources to be able to do development differently. And so I'm glad that you asked that question. I think it's something that a lot of us should be thinking about and trying to understand better. What other tools do we have out there that we can use to develop?
Well, I think a lot of people are asking this question. I'd like to throw it over to Avi, who has experience in this kind of thing. Avi, would you talk about that? Alternate approaches?
I'd be happy to. I just note that I don't know a lot about the disposition process. I am a former resident of Chevy Chase, having lived at Jennifer in Connecticut several eons ago when Robert and I first met, and we've been friends over 15 years. So I'm here simply as an affordable housing subject matter expert, as my day job in financing and developing these projects, both on behalf of nonprofits and sometimes we're an owner ourselves. I actually took a stab at, I'm going to try to share my screen and it's technology. So, all right, did that work? Can you see this?
Yep.
I do.
Perfect. So I went ahead and took a stab and granted, these are very rough numbers, order of magnitude, back of the envelope, all the caveats, all the buttons, all of those things. But my firm is, working on about a dozen affordable housing projects in DC right now. I'm not an architect, but I can play a really horrible one on the Zoom call. So I took a stab at looking at what the footprint is of the existing community space, which is this here, and saying, all right, if we keep that amount of footprint, but build on top of it, what theoretically could you do? So I built 7 stories of residential, some underground parking, some above ground parking. And once again, I'm an architect, but if I scale up other projects I am working on that have 100,000 square feet and X number of units, and just logically go, well, that 100,000 square feet was that many units, how many does this do? So we get, once again, no magic here, but roughly 151 affordable units, and they're tilting towards family size the way this is set up. Don't have to do that. Obviously, if you did more studios and 1s, less 2s and 3s, you get more units. The square feet's the same, but you get the point. But I had another building that was an easy to scale up to do, so I just did that. Then you ask, okay, so what's the affordability level? So here you see, once again, back envelope, some at 30% of AMI, most at 50, some at 80. What are those rents? So on the low end, studios here, high end, 3 bedrooms there. Try to set the table so you see what the underlying assumptions are. So, all right, now let's build the building. Same. So you have, over here, $62 million-ish in construction costs. Once again, just on a per square foot basis, scaling up from other projects. Not saying I have the right number here, but hey, better than a wild guess. Design costs, permitting costs, all those things. In the soft cost line, financing costs, that counts construction period interest, that counts financing fees. We'll get into developer fee in a minute. You go, oh, $10 million developer fee, but then you look over here and a source is deferred developer fee. And we'll get to why you do that game in a minute. And then there's reserves and escrows to build the building. So back of the envelope, I think it's about $90 million to build 150 units here in this kind of configuration. That counts, you notice, zero land cost. So in this world, the city is saying our priority is put as much affordable housing on the site with the existing community center space as we can. You notice this also does not pay for any new community center space. In this model, it assumes the city finances its own community center space with how you would normally finance community center space. All this model is trying to pay for is the housing and parking associated with it, while programming space to do library and community center.
Does that include the cost of the library and the community center?
It does not. This does not. So I think the central point of this, and we'll get to sources now. So first mortgage, everyone knows what that is, right? Rent minus expenses, paid debt service. Under current market conditions, with these kinds of rents and reasonable operating expense projections, I think this thing can support roughly a $17 million first mortgage. Compare that to the cost to build it. Right? It's not cheap to do affordable housing in DC right now. It's a combination of construction costs on the one hand and interest rates skyrocketing on the other. Puts affordable housing in a vice. And then you see the single largest number here, not even the DHCD loan, we'll get to that in a minute. The single largest numbers is federal low-income housing tax credit equity. The single largest subsidy of the production of affordable housing in the country is the federal low-income housing tax credit. But that program is a misnomer. It's called low-income housing, but you can, in DC, at 50% of AMI, you qualify to live in a low-income housing, rental apartment, but you have an income that affords these rents. That's not low-income housing, that's workforce housing. Right? Nonetheless, good luck having an income at this level and affording to live in a market rate apartment built at this location. You could, right? $1,200 for a studio. I have not lived in the neighborhood in a while. I'm guessing a new studio in Chevy Chase built tomorrow would rent for more like $2,000, not $1,200, as an example. So it's not just low-income housing that the tax credit helps finance. It's also what I would call workforce housing. Folks earning 50 and 60% of AMI also qualify for this. And you can do some 80 if you balance it from 30. It's called income averaging. So what winds up happening is the federal government says, great, you spent $90 million building 150, how they define as low-income housing. Good job. We're going to give you $40 million worth of tax credits over 10 years because you did that. You have to keep the units affordable for 40 years to these incomes. But if you do that, you get these tax credits. So the developers like me or nonprofits go, all right, I have $40 million of federal tax credits. I can't use them. So I want to sell them to banks and insurance companies. So under current market conditions, the tax credits this kind of a project would generate would sell for about $37.6 million on the open market. You don't have to repay a penny of that as long as you do your job, deliver the housing and keep it affordable. You also don't give up any economics. The cash flow from the property still goes to the owner, not the tax rate investor. They're not doing this for cash flow. They're doing this for the credit. And you really cannot truly begin to understand how affordable housing in the country, let alone DC, is developed without having a profound understanding of this one subsidy program. It's the biggest thing we got going. And it is.
I'm concerned that, look, I think one of the things we learned from this is how important these subsidies are. And two is just these rough figures tell us, that this project is of potentially of a gargantuan size. I mean, I think I don't want us to start debating numbers right now. We're not at that stage. So, I was getting to
one last capital tax source, then I'll stop because I'm going to show magnitude, right? You don't have to build 7 stories of residential. You could do 4 stories of residential, in which case you wouldn't have 150 units, you'd have 70 or 80, right? That's not my judgment to make. I was just showing what's possible if you make these assumptions. But the last subsidy, the last source is this $21 million housing production trust fund loan from the district government. I think we've all seen the news stories and we've been reading about the housing production trust fund over the last several years. It's there. It's the single largest affordable housing subsidy of its type at a state or local government level. We should be proud of that. But the takeaway though is even with free land, even not paying for the community center space, it costs so much to produce housing in DC right now that your first mortgage and the federal tax credits that you automatically get for doing your job are not enough to pay your bills. They're just not. You still need about a quarter, like 23.8% of your capital stack coming as an additional subsidy from the district government. And the trust fund loans come in as subordinate debt. So you got your first mortgage from any bank USA at $17 million. The trust fund comes in as a second mortgage, and it gets paid out of the cash flow that is left over after you've paid all your other bills. So I just, when you start talking about production, it is certainly more than possible to have this site produce a decent amount of affordable housing. There's space here to do it. Whether you do 7 stories like this is assuming, or you go 5 stories or 4 stories, that's for people way beyond my pay grade to figure out. But whichever scale you get to, this line here is going to be needed even with free land, because that's just the reality of the cost of doing business in DC right now. If you want to have the units affordable at these rents.
Okay, can I just ask one quick question about this model, and then I think we ought to go back to how we're going to intersect with the city process. This presumes to produce 169,000 square feet of residential. How many stories, given the site, how many stories do you need?
I assumed the same footprint as the 2 existing buildings, so I didn't change that footprint. It's 7 stories of the existing building footprint.
And that is just residential. So what we're really talking about here is a 9-story building, because at least, or maybe 10-story, because we've got 2 public institutions and maybe retail on the first floor. So we're talking about a very big building, certainly by measure of this community.
If you keep the existing footprint. Now, if you choose to use up more of the land that's there and expand the footprint, you need less stories to get the same square feet. That's just a math exercise.
Okay.
So
Robert,
let me ask you, you're not including the cost of a new library. You're not including the cost of a new community center, each of which would be what, 10, 15 million dollars, another 20 to 30 million dollars. So are you saying that this proposition that we will not attract developers, that it's not a feasible project?
That is not what I'm saying, but I'm saying if the public policy goal is community center, library, and affordable housing, there are plenty of developers that would build this building if these subsidies were available. There's plenty of nonprofit developers that go into the DHCD Housing Construction Trust Fund annual competition, compete for the Housing Construction Trust Fund source, and build affordable housing in DC. I'm working with several of them right now. It's certainly feasible if there's the political will to prioritize A, affordable housing, and B, pay for it. There's no such thing as a free lunch.
Okay, so Robert, I think that we look. I think that the question that we've got to answer first before the financing question is how whatever gets built has our imprint, that the community has a say. And I think we need to go back to that question. And I'm happy to, if you will have other questions, Robert, go ahead. But we have an immense number of questions.
I want to get to the Q&A from the public, but yes, I agree. I want to make sure that the public has as much input as possible into what goes into this structure, both the community center, the library, as well as the housing,
As well as open space.
and open space and garage space and all of parking space, all of that. And then we select an approach, whether it's dispose or community land trust, or the DC government does it itself, like it does schools and maybe UDC. I mean, nobody owns UDC other than the government. I want to make sure there's plenty of conversation around those topics well before we get into the finances. So with that, why don't you go into some of the Q&A?
Okay, just bear with me. Maybe you ought to.
Let me.
If you have another question. Let me just go back down to Carol Grisby's question. And I'll go back and forth.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear from the panelists, some examples of past public-private development in the city that may have been handled in the same way as we're talking about here, using surplus and disposition. Well, Caitlin, you sound like you've looked at a lot of developments in your former role and now. You're on mute.
Yeah, I know. I was breathing and thinking of an example. Because there's a lot, like I said, and there are some that recently came through that I'll speak about. And I actually want to direct people to the Council Office of Racial Equity website. They have been doing really good work on analyzing the racial impacts of the development processes, such as surplus and disposition of public land. One of them was, a recent one was 2 Patterson. And this was and someone may know more of the details, Max may know more of the details, but I think was a parking lot. Is that correct? And it was going to be surplus to, yeah, maybe. I'd have to look at our building again. But in any event, I'm sorry to not know the specific details of it, but the information is out there. But that is one example. And the Council Office on Racial Equity did an analysis and talked about how the proposed housing that was to be built wasn't going to align with what we know about the needs of Black residents in particular in the district, both income-wise and based on family size. And so these are all things that, we need to take into consideration. That's one example. The other one that I had given before was the Carmel School in Ivy City. That went through a surplus and disposition process, and there is a lot of discussion and a lot of things that you can find about that. Again, that was from 2018, I believe, is when those hearings happened. That was a consolidated hearing, if I'm remembering correctly. McDuffie and Councilmember Che were the chairs of the 2 committees that oversaw the surplus and then the disposition process. And I saw another question in the chat that was asking about the order, making sure that we were clear on the order. The order is always surplus first, then disposition, as Max described. What we have seen at council, though, is sometimes those hearings have happened together. So by the time it gets to council, you're looking at both the surplus and the disposition as a full package. And part of the common ground is the approach to this piece of legislation is to separate them so that we can have the discussion about whether the land is needed at all for public purposes, and then decide what the plan should be if we say, yeah, we don't necessarily need this land anymore. So I know those. I'm sorry that that's not, I could pull up my testimony from then and list out more properties, and there are definitely more, and I can look at our hearing records as well. But 2 Patterson, like I said, is a recent one. The Ivy City Carmel School is a second one.
Max, did you want to say anything more about 2 Patterson, or can we move on?
I was just I just pulled up the map, and 2 Patterson is indeed a parking lot right now. But yes, it has been used in just to echo what Caitlin said, it's been used in lots of circumstances in various different ways. But yes, okay. I agree.
Let me ask another question and then supplement it a little from Margaret Lenzner. Can affordable housing be a public use that would prevent surplus and disposition? I think what's packed into that question is, could we say no? It's there's nothing to be surplus here. We want to put it to public use and find a way to do development that added the public use of affordable housing. And I sort of asked that question on behalf of Margaret in the abstract, but also, are there examples of development that didn't use the surplus process where we ended up with housing in the city, where, for example, the city retained or a community land trust retained ownership of it so that the land remained in public purpose, and part of the public purpose served for it was affordable housing? Anybody want to take that one?
I guess I'll try to take it. I think first I believe that if there was going to be a transfer to a community land trust, there would have to be a disposition as well. So even if it because it is being transferred, even if it's just a ground lease themselves also require a disposition, even if the district retains the ownership of the fundamental underlying ownership of the land. I think that was a question that was asked earlier. I'm sure there are many ways of doing development. I think this is it's a question of the resources, the other aspects of the district. If DHCD wanted to fund it completely affordable housing, perhaps they could do so, but they have their own internal processes for determining how to do that, where that funding would come from, how they would do it, who they would partner with, and so forth. This is, I think, this is an alternative way of doing it that is, as I said, is often used in redeveloping properties that are underbuilt, as it were, and the way of determining that underbuilt is, as Caitlin was saying, that surplus designation is determining that there is available rights of some kind that can be subsequently, that are no longer needed, therefore can be disposed of in order to achieve some public policy goals. I did want to, if I can jump in just briefly, Peter, because I think I saw this in the chat, just in terms of just a quick response to Avram's great, and it was great to see the internal workings of the spreadsheets and the financials. The development of this particular site, as with any site, will be determined by the comprehensive plan, right? What it calls for in terms of the FLUM, the future land use map designation for a particular property, combined with the small area plan, and ultimately by what's allowed at zoning. And so just, not everywhere in the district can you go up to 10 stories. Some are going to be less and some are going to be more. It's a bit of a complicated process, but just to keep that in mind before, I don't believe at this site that a 10-story building is likely to be permitted. You never say never, but I think that the maximum is probably going to be closer to a 50-foot plus of the MU4 plus a penthouse. Again, I know the small area plan called for new zones there, so there could be something, but again, the FLUM provides some kind of limit. So I just want to make sure that we didn't get ahead of ourselves to think that all of a sudden this is going to be Manhattan on for this one property.
But just to add to that, so the community knows the small area plan that was adopted by council asked for a special zoning district for the Connecticut Avenue corridor, and that is likely to be released. The Office of Planning's proposal for that will go to the zoning commission is likely to be released in the next 4, 6, 8 weeks. And so we have two big issues. They're interconnected, but they're both coming at us. What we do with our community center library and what the zoning is for all of Upper Connecticut Avenue. So just prepare yourselves, put your seatbelt on that one. I just want to say that Margaret's question about essentially treating affordable housing as a public use and trying to develop this site in some way that retains the public purpose is echoed in a lot of people's questions. Marie and Bill Hoffman, is there a reason not to treat affordable housing as a public use so that the determination of ultimate use precedes surplusing? Michael Gibbons, I assume the Chevy Chase community wants to use all of the land for public uses. No, this is a slightly different question. Does the city not want to? And I'd just like to say, with regard to Max's answer, you talked about there has to be a disposition. I guess one of the things that's throwing people right now in this community is, does there have to be a surplusing? Does there, you know, I mean, the idea of saying, no, we're going to give up part of it. If we do it, both the community center and the library and housing as a public purpose, is there not a way we can do that so we retain control, the public control of the property?
Yeah, I think there probably are. And that's what the Green New Deal legislation that came out, the concept of social housing, public housing, even as an example, there are areas that are public land where there is affordable housing. And so I do think that these things are likely possible. But again, we're in a posture now where this is a tool that has been used most frequently, or one of the tools that has been used the most frequently by the current administration, and I think by past administrations too, to produce affordable housing, and so, or housing period. And then to Avi's point, looking at what those actual levels of affordability are and what we're able to get, even it may be for someone with a higher income because of the high price of housing in DC versus actually reaching people who really need the supports in staying in that housing. So I think the overarching answer to this line of questions is yes, there's probably something else that's possible. What our job is collectively is to figure out what that is, to, I think, equip ourselves with the knowledge to be able to effectively challenge what the current status quo is, and to say, is there a way that we can do this differently and better, not just in Chevy Chase, but in other communities too that have been fighting for a variety of resources that they want and need in those particular areas as well. And I'll just say, I did pull up a couple other examples so I could jog my memory of some other surpluses and dispositions if people wanted to look them up. One big one that people may be familiar with is the Franklin School downtown that underwent a surplus and disposition. It's now the Museum of Words or something. Also used to be a shelter. So there's a lot of rich history when we look at these disposition properties, but that's one other example.
A question that Michelle Wolin brought to our attention. She says, in the survey done by OP and a past survey by the ANC, the community was clear that they valued the playground, ballparks, and open green space of the property. Even OP acknowledged this in the SAP. It sounds like this land will be sold off. The developer will have no interest, no profit motive in keeping the land unbuilt for public use and recreation. How will we be able to preserve the open space, playground, and outdoor recreation facilities if this land is sold off? And I guess that speaks to all of the public input that is needed to ensure that the site meets what the public wants. Caitlin? Do you see that question?
I was trying to find it as you were talking, so I missed it.
Up in the earlier portion. Michelle Wolin.
Let me see. I'm sorry, I was checking out the Q&A. Max, if you have a stab at that question, unless it's directed to me, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was trying to find it. I saw it earlier myself. I think the larger question, I think echoing you, Caitlin, what you just said here is public use itself. I mean, the law itself talks about potential public uses. That's the determination of the surplus process, is to determine if there are any public uses, potential public uses that should be retained on the site. I think that is clearly falls within the surplus determination. So somebody could say with justification that, as I think has been said here on the chat, that there's insufficient access to playgrounds or open space, and then that could be just as much as it's also about what should be included when one talks about a community center, a library, a fire engine station, so that it is always, I think that is always going to be the purpose of the surplus, is determining when we say a library, when we say a fire station, what is it that is needed, what is it to be retained on site, and therefore what is the part that is no longer needed for that. And that definition of a public use, generally, I think it has been used for facilities, for a library, engine station, a fire engine station, a police substation. But it certainly could be, and that's a political discussion or a policy discussion as to what are the appropriate public uses that should be retained on the site.
Robert, Ed Hayes asks, what is the consideration for parking? How much to be provided for underground or above ground? And will there be an enforceable requirement for, quote, adequate, unquote, parking space? I don't know, Avram, I don't know who of you want to address this. The city has been moving in the opposite direction from parking, away from providing parking. It's inconceivable to me how this site can be useful for a community that's one of the oldest in DC in terms of people like my age populating it, without being able to provide parking. How does one work that into, will the city help in that regard? And how does you work that into a development proposal?
Great question. And just to circle back a little bit, I just did some back of the envelope math. And if you did a 7-story building instead of a 10-story building, you go from 150 units to 94 units. I mean, that's just a sliding scale of how dense you want to make it. I'm not having any opinion on that. I'll just give an illustration. So same thing with parking. To the extent you go underground, and my budget did include some underground parking, you can do that. Once again, it's just a political decision and of how dense do you want to make the development, and how much parking do you want to require. There is, for example, a practical difference between if you did a senior building versus a family building. You need less parking for a senior building than you do a family. That's common sense. And there's also a difference between what OP might require from a zoning perspective versus what a neighborhood or what the market dictates is more practical from a just practical reality of you're in Chevy Chase, you've got a library, you got a community center, you got families where they're going to park. So you would want all that to be assessed as part of any proposal that came to the door, and go from there. But certainly, once again, nothing's not possible. It's possible to do any of this if there's the will and the resources to be brought to bear to deliver the final product the community wants to see.
Robert, you seeing other questions you think are?
Yeah, there are other questions, but I want to make sure that we don't start designing this building and articulating all of the elements that we want to see in there. That's not the purpose of our meeting today. Our meeting is to try to understand the mechanics of this. I think that once we figure that out, then we can figure out what's going to go into this the structure, and that'll be a whole different set of discussions. Do you agree with me, Peter?
Yeah, I do. And could I, in that regard, I think we need to return to a couple simple-minded questions, which is, we have, it seems to me, you, Caitlin, and Max, and many of the people in the Q&A who are from our community, but and deeply steeped in the development process, are saying this surplus and disposition track is used all the time and has been used for a long time. All fine. The example Caitlin cited, though, Carmel School, which was in many other ways a disaster, it took forever for the community to get a voice in that, and only recently, I think, has the mayor turned around and listened to the community finally. That and I think many of the other cases cited are a package deal. That is to say, essentially, disposition was either presented at the same time or very closely tied to it. As I understand the process we're talking about here, we're supposed to address the question of surplus with no idea, other than sort of broadly a community center and library, no idea what else would be there, what else. We can talk at this hearing Thursday about what else, but has this, asking people to address a surplusing idea kind of in midair with nothing around it, no just idea at all what might be built. Is that usual? Because it, just as an ordinary human being, it's not a very easy issue to decide, to address. I mean, how do you think about it?
I take that space and run with it. I mean, that is a gift to be able to think in broad terms about what you want in a location. A lot of communities don't have that benefit. I'll say too, though, that more are coming back to me as we go. So thank you for all of your patience. But at 17th and U, there was a surplus hearing last July, and it was the same idea. So it's a police station and a fire station right now. When the comprehensive plan happened, that area was up-flummed, which means that this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but within the comprehensive plan, you have a future land use map, or a FLUM, and that designates different from the zoning maps, but it does designate kind of what is allowable in that particular area. And so when the comp plan was revised a couple of years ago, a lot of the future land use map areas were increased in density in terms of what is going to be allowed to be built in particular areas across the city. 17th and U was one of those spaces. So I think right now, or previously, it may have been for, I don't know, like low or resident, I don't exactly know what it was, but at this point it's higher. So what's allowed to be built there is a lot more and different than what it was laid out to be before. And so there were postures of what could potentially be there, but they were only conversations in my knowledge. I haven't seen any plans more laid out for that particular space. However, last July, like I said, there was a surplus hearing similar to the one that you all will have on Thursday, where community members came and had a discussion kind of like this. And I can share with you what that was like if that would be helpful for folks. Just as an observer, DEMPED was there. They had a hybrid, so there were people who were sitting in the room, there were people who were online asking questions, people lined up, and they just went through and said their piece, and they said what they thought the land could be used for and whether or not they thought it should be kept or used for public purposes. That record, DEMPED has to keep a record of that. One of the things that wasn't clear to me, and I think I asked this question there, was whether or not they had to respond and if they would post those responses to the community feedback that they received somewhere. And the answer, I think, was no. I don't think that's written in the law currently. So I saw a question asking me to delineate more of what Common Ground would do and how it would change the process. That's one of the things that we took into consideration in drafting this. We want to make sure that there's actual responses. And community engagement oftentimes in the city, as many of you probably know, at least my experience has been, there's not always that feedback loop. It's kind of you go, you dump your ideas, or you go and you listen to what the city's ideas are, but it's not a real dialogue. And it's hard to tell what and how and when your ideas are actually incorporated. Now, being on the government side, I will say, sometimes I think that feedback loop just doesn't happen because people get busy. However, I do think there's also room for improvement in terms of making sure that it is an actual communication and dialogue with people. So that 17th and U, like I said, is another example that you all may want to look at that's related and similar to what you're going through now. And then this might be slightly different, but the West End Library also, I think, went through this process. And there was a lot of discussion and concern about the way that went down, but that also involved a library and a fire station. So there are developments across the city that you can look at. This is not it feels unique because it's in each neighborhood, and each of these development projects are unique. I don't think this is unique in the sense that it hasn't been done before. So you can look to these other examples to see what those processes looked like, and even talk to people in those neighborhoods if you want to get a sense of what engagement they had with the processes and if they felt heard.
There's a question here that's complicated, and I'd like to understand it. I'm going to allow Ellen McCarthy, who posed the question, to speak. So I hope you're still there.
I am.
There you go.
Good. Would you explain or repeat the question that you put on the Q&A?
There are two of them.
Oh, well, I saw.
Yeah, there's actually three, but which
Take
one do you
one.
want, Robert?
The one I'm looking at is the earlier one, having to do, it seems to be very sensible, and so on and so forth.
Aren't they always sensible, Robert?
No.
Oh, I see. It seems to be, yes.
Yeah.
So
it's your-
basically, right, basically, I wish DIMP had a graphic, but if you envision a line, the first part is you've got a piece of property, you know that you want to rebuild the library and the community center. But if you don't know that there's no other district government purpose for that land, then you certainly can't make it available to do something like do affordable housing. So first you have to know that there's no other use contemplated or that would be a better district government use. And then that's what surplusing is about. Once the council votes that indeed there isn't any other reason other than the library and the community center and any other purpose for this land, then you've got a blank slate in effect other than the library and community center. Then the DIMP has already agreed that they would get input from the community about what should be in the RFP. And the RFP can include, number of affordable units or parking, all kinds of information. The developers then submit responses to the RFP. They present them to the ANC. The ANC votes, DIMP chooses, and the developer has to build what the developer said it was going to build in the proposal.
Okay.
So people thinking that somehow a developer is going to gobble up the playground when that wasn't part of the developer's proposal, that's not going to happen. But the important thing to remember is this doesn't have to mean that the ownership of the land is being transferred to a private entity. Most of the time, when the district uses this process, it retains ownership of the land. It does a long-term ground lease with the developer. And at the end of the term of the ground lease, the district takes the land back. So we're not giving away this land. We're not selling it necessarily, unless that's the way DIMP decides to go, but I don't imagine the council would do that. So I don't know. I hope that emerged as sensible.
Ellen, can I follow up with you on a couple of things? One is, you say DIMP has agreed to seek community input. My impression from, I think, 3 meetings we've had with Jill is that he's made clear that the only thing the city, the DIMP is obliged to do is to wrap up whatever we say on Thursday and stick it in the surplus agreement to the city, to the council. Is there any requirement in law, and maybe this goes but not only to you, Ellen, but also to Caitlin or to Max, is there a requirement that DIMP respond? Is there a requirement that DIMP modify or include the requests that will be made Thursday in its proposal to the council and then in the request for proposal?
It wouldn't make sense to include that in the proposal that goes to the council because it's a very limited question. The question before the council will be, is there another district government use for the site? And once the council says there is not, then all those questions about use go into the process of preparing and issuing the RFP and then choosing the successful developer. It's two completely different ideas.
Okay, and then can I ask you about these 99-year leases? Are there any examples, and again, I pose it to any of the panelists too, are there any examples where, I mean, 99 years is a long time, we're all going to be dead. Are there any examples where the city has used that hold to force changes in the management or the use of the property, improve property, taken back the land and what was on it? Is there any example where it's been used in an effective way to change what was happening on it after it was leased?
The two examples that I know of the best that were ground leased are one that Caitlin mentioned, the Planet Word, the Franklin School, because I worked on that. And the district made it very clear to the successful bidder, to the Planet Word people, that it was going to have to be used as a museum of the word, that it was going to have to offer free admission because that's what had been agreed to. And the other one is the Hill Center, which was surplus and now is used as an educational center by Hill East. For the most part, people, I don't know of examples where somebody signs a ground lease and then defaults on it, or if they tried to use the land for another purpose besides the ground lease, that would clearly be a violation of the lease, and they would lose it. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Max, you're the lawyer.
No, yes, Ellen, no, the purpose of the ground lease is really to maintain long-term control and to enforce the provisions of the agreement that's made with the developer, as I think Ellen has said. So generally, I think the terms of the lease will establish whether or not the district, what the rights are of the district during the tenancy period. There, depending on the specifics, there may be more or less flexibility for the tenant, the developer, but there will be, so for example, there may be flexibility, a process by which, if there is, that the arrangement says that there's supposed to be 20,000 square feet of retail space that's going to be used for X, Y, and Z. There will usually be some kind of mechanism whereby that can be renegotiated or dealt with the permission of the district as the ground lessor, the landlord. But generally, I'm not sure that the district is going to be involved in an active way, taking it back, short of the tenant, the development or whatever's built on the site, whoever the operator is, grossly defaulting on the terms of the lease. I mean, the agreement is really going to be done ahead of time and determine how that property can be used. So therefore, as a result, once it's leased for 99 years, yes, the district owns it. It does retain, it gives it that ability to make sure what will happen eventually in the future. It also makes sure that that agreement will be enforced, but I don't believe, depending on the circumstances or the specifics of the agreement, it generally does not anticipate that the district will be that actively involved, except if there is a real problem where the operator seeks to use it in a way that's different than what was agreed upon.
Pam Janice has a question that I'd like to hear, and I'm going to allow her to talk. Pam, are you there? I guess we'll move along. Let me read the question. Here's the thing, though. What if the city says the property isn't needed and the residents say it is? If surplus is a done deal, be honest about it. In which case our input feels performative. I think a lot of people hold this opinion that no matter what we say on Thursday, the property is going to be surplus, and it's pretty much out of the public's hand. Your thoughts, Max?
I would say, and Caitlin may have, maybe the more appropriate person to respond to this, but I think that the law clearly anticipates that the mayor, as the executive, the administrator, is the one who proposes, determines what the real property is, makes a proposal. They have to get input from the community, but then their proposal is what is sent to council, and council is the one who makes the decision. That's the broad brush stroke. So I think, therefore, in theory, under that process, the council could decide that they disagree with the proposal made by the mayor for the surplus, whether rejecting the entire thing or rejecting a part of it. A part of saying, there's the surplus should not just include the engine, the fire engine station, but should also include a police substation or something like that. I think the practice, and this I think where Caitlin may be best equipped to respond, is that can be a little bit difficult for the council to be able to delve into that level of detail. But I do think there is a role for anticipated in the law for the community to state its opinion as to first of all, at least at this stage, whether or not there is any available interest in the real estate that is no longer serves a public purpose and therefore can proceed to the next stage, which would be the disposition.
Robert, let me make a suggestion. I just want to say in response to Max, this is a personal statement. I'm afraid the city is going to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. We as a community, I think, a lot of us are ready to do something innovative at that site. If the city jams it through and the mayor says she's the decider and just does whatever they decide, they're going to lose the support of the community, and it's going to be a total mess. Robert, that's a sort of just editorializing. I wonder if we could invite people who can either ask questions or give a synoptic view of what they think might be an alternative to surplusing and disposition. Because I do think that by talking so much about it, we've effectively agreed that that's where it's going to go. Now, that may be.
You missed my chance to set them straight. They actually called upon me.
Hold it, Ellen.
Ellen, I think you're still on the mic.
You got a hot mic. So, are there people who'd like to raise their hands who would, and this is not for a screed, this is for some real description of what might be an alternative to the surplusing route. No takers on that one?
Well, I'm looking. Yeah, I've got 4 hands up.
I'll just share too, this stuff is tough. Even if people don't share ideas now, I don't take that to mean that they're not out there, people don't have them. Clearly it took me 20 minutes to come up with things I've been studying for a long time. This is really hard to say on in the moment. But I'll just share, you retain it. Like I said before, there is legislation pending on the Green New Deal. There's a lot more discussions on social housing. We're talking about the housing authority and our public housing properties. And I know that hasn't nationally at least been a push towards expanding public housing. But if we open our minds to what possibilities are just in general without restrictions, we can really brainstorm these things. So maybe I bought some people time to add things into the chat by saying those things, but please know, these are things that I think about a lot. These are things that I know our office is going to be thinking about as we move forward and doing oversight over the housing committee too. So I'm taking notes, copying down the questions in the chat. Really looking forward to diving into this stuff more. Also, just want to thank Ellen for being on here as a former Office of Planning Director. It's interesting to hear your thoughts, and I'll let other people ask questions, but I will say, I'm curious to know how the landscape has changed from your perspective, having been part of the Williams administration during a period of time when there was studies have shown there was pretty intense gentrification. And I don't know if the surplus and disposition processes were used as frequently then, but that is something that's on my mind as well. Like, what are the cycles of development looked like in DC? Who was able to stay? Who was not able to stay? Who was pushed out? And are there ways to reverse it, or do we need to do, to Peter's point, more innovative things to make sure that we are making space in the new context that we're in today?
I have a few hands up, and I'm not sure they're addressing Peter's question or just hands up, but I'm going to allow people to talk. Loretta Kiron.
Yes, I put this in the chat.
Can you bring yourself up on the camera?
I don't know if I can do.
I'd rather not.
No, but the problem is that when we post this, if you're not on camera, you don't show up. I mean, it's just a voice in the middle of nowhere. So
Well, she would rather not be on.
okay.
Yeah, okay. The discussion about surplus property is currently focusing on affordable housing. The city should recognize that there has been a clear neglect about adding a senior center on the property. Ward 3 has no senior center yet, has the most seniors. And to include them and keep the property for the community is necessary, in my opinion.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. The next person is Mara.
Verheyden-Hilliard.
Thank you. You're unmuted.
Thanks for letting me speak. So I posted a couple of questions in the chat, and
Hold it. You there? What happened?
I promoted her and I may have lost her.
Mara, come back.
There we
I'm
go.
here now.
There we
Okay.
are.
Lost for a moment, but back. So, you know, there's a couple things here that I think are very problematic, and that I've tried to raise in the chat. I mean, I would note that the way that you all have set up this program, we can't see each other's questions and communications. So in terms of, like, there's reference to dialogue, it's hard to have a dialogue if we can't even hear from each other and see what others are thinking and saying. I've posted that earlier. But right now, I mean, we have the Green New Deal that has widespread support on the council, that is likely to pass, that is an enormous sea change in a progressive step forward for creating affordable housing in the district, for fighting back against racist disenfranchisement. And we have to recognize that the housing crisis in the district and the situation that we face and the racist disenfranchisement is because of private development in the district. And endlessly turning to private developers to solve the problem that they create is a farce. And pushing this through right now, like, why all of a sudden in the holiday season did they spring this? Did the mayor's office suddenly spring this on everyone that this is going to be surplus? Now, first of all, the regulations for surplusing say it, what we all understand surplus to mean, right? Property that's not being used. This is not surplus property. We all know it's not surplus property. That's just like a false presentation. But this meeting and the meeting on Thursday, the people must come to that meeting on Thursday, either in person or by webinar. But the whole point here is we actually shouldn't be talking about how we want to see the developers develop this. What this needs to be is a discussion at the first step of surplusing. There is no legitimate basis to be calling this property to be surplus, unused district property. This is our public property. It belongs to the people of the District of Columbia. And this property, there should be a moratorium on surplusing right now, which a number of affordable housing advocates are calling for, because we're going to have the Green New Deal for social housing. That's going to create a whole new policy in the district to allow the district to develop its own properties, to be able to create really wonderful housing, meaningful, affordable housing that's mixed income housing without the private developer's profit interests, without giving away this property in Chevy Chase, which we all know is very valuable and is just lining developers' pockets. And I'm sorry, but I think this has to be said. And it's crucial right now that what we talk about is the fact that we don't have to accept the surplus designation, and that we have a right as a community and as residents of the District of Columbia to oppose the surplus designation, and to say that we actually do want to see this, if it's going to be developed in a way that is meaningful and will make a difference. But right now the discussion is the surplusing, and we shouldn't just be accepting that that's going to happen and that we don't have the right to fight back against it.
Okay.
Well, I hope that you testify on Thursday to that. I think we've learned a lot about the surplus process. And I think that your testimony and others that are adamant, strong, forthright will help us a great deal in making sure that this property is properly developed. Thank you.
You have a few more.
Yeah, we have a hand up from Beverly Bender.
That's
Benderly.
Yeah, Beryl.
What?
Her name isn't Beverly.
Name is Beryl Benderly.
Sorry, I'm promoting
Beryl.
you to panelist.
Okay. I want to agree with everything that the previous speaker said. I am not an expert on any of this, but I am an expert on the recreation facilities of the space we're talking about, because my son grew up playing basketball on that field, that court. It's very important to young men in this neighborhood. I take my grandson to the little play lot. That's very important to little children in this neighborhood. So far as I can see, every inch of that property is currently used for public purposes: the library, the community center, the outdoor recreation, of which there isn't a whole lot in that area, and parking for those facilities. I do not understand how any of it can be declared not usable for public purposes. And I absolutely agree that this whole process is a put up job. We're being railroaded. They obviously brought it up during the holidays because no one was paying attention. And I absolutely agree that I don't know if it's possible to fight this. I suspect that they're counting on us not fighting it or not knowing how to fight it. But the idea that that area, that land is not currently of public use, in my opinion, is ridiculous.
Thank you, Beryl. Next up is Cheryl Wasserman.
What about Councilmember?
I don't know if I could add anything other than a solution, perhaps.
Got one?
Yeah, well, I don't see any reason why there isn't a public process for developing the RFP. Oh, am I speaking?
Yes.
Okay, it says join as a panel.
Yeah, if you hit that, we can get an image of you.
She sounds
Thank
like
you. And now you're muted.
You can either speak or be seen.
you got a choice.
You're both. You're both.
I seem to hear a suggestion that that it's not worth it for developers to put money into coming up with a proposal if they don't already know exactly that they will actually have an in on the result. And from what I saw of the economic analysis, this can be done in a way that would be profitable. So I think that everybody would feel a lot more comfortable if we had competitive RFP, that we had a voice in what the request for proposal included, whether it includes more than the library and the community center, whether it includes the community space for pickleball or whatever, a basketball, and parking, whatever the elements are, that there be a competitive process, and that we try to see if we could, no, Cheryl, many of us don't want, I'm sorry, somebody's saying something. And then we can see whether or not we can accommodate these uses with 4, 5, 6 stories. The designs have to be compatible. I don't know why this process would segment out the housing portion, and why are you not allowing us to see?
Yeah, don't pay attention to that. You just to finish your remarks. It's, I mean,
I'm sorry. So I just think it has to be an integrated design anyway, and this seems to presuppose that it can be segmented. So that's what I'm asking our panel. Isn't it possible to do that, to change the order, or at least go out with the RFP and hold the hearing for surplusing at the same time in tandem with a selection process?
I think Caitlin sort of addressed this earlier. I think Caitlin, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the idea of it, and I believe it may have been Councilmember Che amongst others, who actually saw, who sought and were able to achieve a separation of the surplus from the disposition. Precisely, I believe, from what I understand, because that sort of put it too much together. And there was a desire to separate, first of all, the determination of what public uses needed to be retained on the site, and therefore what was, if there was any space available that was no longer needed for a public use, and then only then, once that's done, then to go to a disposition process. I completely understand the concern, right? And the feeling that that's sort of backwards, but I do believe that that was an attempt to give the community some more opportunities to participate, because it was, the idea was, let's first say, what are the public uses on site? And I would just, you know, I think part of the, again, the purpose of the surplus determination is really to do that, to determine, is there any space that's available, or are there in fact public uses that should go there? One view might be to say, we're only talking about public facilities, right? That, you know, unless there's a fire station or a police substation to be put onto the site in addition to what's existing there, then it should all go to disposition. And when it goes out to, then it's surplus, so we can have that, then we can determine whether it's affordable housing or what will be developed on that. The alternative would be to say, as I think some of you had said, is that those potential public uses would include, let's say, pickleball courts, or could include affordable housing. Those are all potential public uses that, one, in theory, I'm not sure how much that has been used in this process. I believe that's part of what the bill, the Common Ground bill, is attempting to do, or the Green New Deal and so forth, is to establish, to sort of broaden what that definition of public use that should be retained on the site.
Thank you. I think I understand this better. So this is really not, we can better say that this is about articulating what the public uses are that are important to us, and get that as a matter of record. Okay.
Yeah, and that will be picked up for the disposition side. So to Mara's point and to Max's point, like the first stage is just whether or not this land is necessary for a public purpose. That's it. I think the reason why there's a lot of discussion about what it could be is because oftentimes there's already an idea of what it could be. And so if you know the administration has an idea of what it could be, the community is going to want to counter that with an alternative idea. That's in practice how it works. That's not necessarily what it says in the law is necessary. The question is just, is it needed for public purposes? And to Max's point about how this bifurcation happened or the separation. I will just give credit to community members who've been working on land use stuff for a long time, including Empower DC, Teresa Naruzzi, I'm sure worked with a ton of different community members too that I'm not naming. But I just wanted to raise that up as well. Oftentimes these ideas come from the community. They've been pushing for them for a long time, and then council's able to respond and make the changes.
Can I ask a quick question of either you, Caitlin, or Max? Has DEMPED ever taken the comments of the community and included them in the surplus agreement, not just as a transcript of what people said, but that this project, we are talking about surplusing a portion of this land for, and let's have a dozen purposes. In other words, one of the things that is so troubling about this is that, I mean, both we have nothing to go on about other than the current purposes that the property is put to. We have no idea how the other, how housing might be integrated and so how much and so on. And also the only thing that Jill Stucker representing DEMPED has said is that they'll transcribe the comments that we make Thursday and include them in the package, but that doesn't mean that they'll be included in what DEMPED asks as the surplus agreement. I think a lot of people are so suspicious of this because it feels like a blank check. It feels like we're being asked, well, can we give away, or can we sell, can we lease a portion? We're not going to tell you what portion, we're not going to tell you what percentage, and we're not going to tell you what for exactly, other than we do commit that there's going to be a community center and library. And that feels like a blank check, and I'm trying to find ways around to fill in the check some, to get the city to fill in the check some. Can it?
Both, truly, like that is part of what the goal of Common Ground is too. Like I was saying before, it's to make sure that there is an actual conversation, actual tracking of the ideas that are coming forth. It's pulling in the Office of Planning, is pulling in other agencies so that we can make sure that it's not, I mean, the Office of Planning is under DEMPED. So all of this stuff goes back to even the structure of our government and how planning happens. And so it's very, honestly, it's very interesting to me to talk about the concerns over the blank check. Like, I understand what you're saying too. On the other side, like I'm used to working with communities who their fates feel fully sealed. And I know that's how a lot of people on this call feel as well, because the sentiment that I'm getting is once there's a property that's even going through a surplus process, it feels like a done deal. And I think that's a fair way to feel about a lot of these different processes. But it's interesting. I just want to point that out. It is interesting to hear like the juxtaposition of, you know, there's concern because we don't know what the plans are. And then oftentimes there's also concerns in other communities because they do know what the plans are and there's no way to stop them. So there's a lot of stuff that we have to work out, but that's one of the issues that we want to try to address with this legislation, making sure that it is clear, making sure that the things that are being raised are addressed and that the right entities and agencies are actually at the table with community members to engage in this as an actual process and actual engagement.
Okay.
We have time for one more question. I see another hand up, so I'm going to ask Eleanor Hart to speak, and we'll promote her to panelist. Eleanor, are you there?
I am, but I don't have a question.
Your hand was up. Now it's down.
I'm sorry. I was fooling with my.
Okay. Then there is Marie, and I don't get the whole name, but
Bill Hoffman.
Hi, it's Bill Hoffman. And my question, I think it's a little confusing about whether
you can promote to panelist.
Bill, click on promote to panelist, Bill, if you can hear.
Okay, I see I'm unmuted. I don't know whether I'm visible, but in any case, the question I had is, if you surplus land, can that surplus be land in the air? In other words, if you surplused, floors 5 through 8 of an existing building, is that feasible so that we can talk about building affordable housing on top of a community center or a combination community center and library? Because I just think it's easier to consider this if we're talking about uses of the same land. I understand Beryl Benderly's point about everything now is already used for public use. Can't we, how can we say that it's not public use, and how can we surplus that?
Can I just say, Bill, that one of the problems I think here is because we have no proposal, no request for proposal is put out, no either conceptual proposal has come in. What Gil Stucker, what at least I've heard him say at our hearings is that we just have to address the blank question. We've even, I think, raised the question of, could we talk about this as air rights or potentially air rights? And he basically says, I don't want to commit because there's no plan. Well, that's one of the problems with the way the process works. We're asked to address this in some sort of cosmic philosophical way where there's just no practicality, with no particulars to it. So,
but am I right in understanding that this isn't precluded? It could be housing on top of the public use.
I assume so. I mean,
I'm sorry, Peter, I believe that is precisely what is being stated by DMPED when they talk about a portion of it being declared surplus, meaning that part of the property which is not going to be used for the library and the community center, or in other places it would be the fire station or whatever. In other words, what is particularly reserved, right? Everything else is what they're declaring surplus. I think the problem, however, the concern I think that Peter is articulating, if I'm correct, is that the declaration is it's the lack of a plan, I guess, in the details of, is it going to be a 10,000 square foot community center or a 20,000 square foot fire station? What the specifics of it, other than just simply saying there will be a library or there will be a fire engine on the set, whatever those particular named items are, that I think is part of what could certainly be included in the public record and sent to council for their consideration as to what it is that should be included as part of that surplus determination. What I will say, getting back to that question about like the issue basically of air rights, is two things. First of all, this particular property, as Caitlin had indicated earlier, as in lots of places in the district, there was in the most recent comprehensive plan update, the amount of allowable density was increased on the site, as with a bunch of the other neighboring properties. As a result, there's theoretical additional space that can be developed on that same site. So in other words, that way of conceiving it may be exactly as you just described, which was basically what is there, and then there's another couple stories of potential development that can be built up above that. And that is what the discussion is right now as to is that needed for a public use, depending on how one defines public use, and if so, that it's not needed for public use, then that would be disposed. I think one of the concerns, there is, I think, a valid concern to tying too much of the, to provide too much detail in the surplus in terms of saying it may be that to maintain flexibility as to the precise layout of where the public facility would be on floors 2 through 4, or on one half of the property or the other. But that is a concern, and I think that's one of the flexibilities. But I think there's also this question, I think, of the bare minimum or the simple description that we see now is just simply there will be a community center, there will be a library, and everything else is not needed for a public use. I don't know if that, I hope that addresses, yeah.
Part of the reason I raised the question, Max, is because when Maria and I were walking the property with Office of Planning representatives, we talked about, here's all this space that's being used actively now, and we were told, well, we could work this around so that the public housing, which sounded like they meant a separate building on the property, could be, there's a way to do both the public housing in one place and the community center and the library in another place. And I want to make sure that that's not the necessary outcome. And that's really all my points.
Right, and just to say, just to be clear about it, I think the laws it currently establishes really gives a fair amount of discretion to the mayor for determining, once that surplus designation is determined, the mayor, as in DIMPED, should look to endeavor to fulfill the principles of the comprehensive plan, the small area plan. They should respond, or they should take into consideration the comments of the community. But ultimately, really, at least the way that it is currently written, that it's really the mayor that is delegated the authority to put together the package of saying, these are the basic things we want, and then determining which of those proposals are the ones that they would recommend.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we have gone a bit past our scheduled program plan. It's been a wide-ranging set of questions and answers. I know that not everything has been answered. Not everything has been answered to people's satisfaction, but I do hope we learned a lot. Remember that this is an opportunity to get a little more educated on the process, so that when you go to the meeting on January 14th, that you're better prepared and equipped to ask strong questions to DMPED. And so I'm going to wrap it up here. Peter? You need to unmute.
Sorry, Robert, I think you said the 14th. It's Thursday, January 12th. And we absolutely, the city's clearly going to be counting. So I hope we can get a huge turnout. Whatever your views about the process, or whatever your views about the outcome you want, I hope people will come. Robert, I hope you'll try save the Q&A and chat. Do you have the capacity to do that?
I'll see what I can do. I don't know if I have that technical capability.
Because the ANC posts that along with the video. I suspect the Chevy Chase Community Association will post the video, and I will post it on the ANC's website.
Yeah.
I just want to say again, I think it's problematic that the chat and the communications are not available for all of the people who are here to see. And it is possible to save the chat and the communications, and I think it's important that they be part of the record of this meeting.
Okay, Mara, but you understand that this is not a conspiracy. This turns out to be our technical incapacities with these things and just trying to get these meetings up. So I think one of the ways we can do this, if we manage it, is at least to post it after the fact. I think there are a lot of process issues here that could be better, but the fact is that we're in real time here with a city that's pushing a series of decisions that we've got to get with, and so we have not had time, as we did. We originally.
Right, but this is a community meeting to tell the community how they can oppose it, and there was no reason not to make the chat visible to people. So, I mean, those are small things, not a conspiracy, easy to do.
Okay. So thank all of you for coming and for your comments, and we hope to see you Thursday.
And thank you, Max, Caitlin, and
Absolutely.
Bobby for your wonderful presentations. Take care. Bye-bye.
Hey guys, could you turn the recording off while you're both still here?
I'm trying to get him. I don't want him to turn it off, Cal, because I want him to save the chat and the Q&A, and I'm worried that if we turn it off, we lose it.
You called on me, but then somebody else jumped in and you didn't call on me again. And I had an answer to your question about alternatives to this.
Hold on a second, Robert.
Yeah.
Don't log off, because I think we ixnay the chat and Q&A if you do that. So I'm sorry, I got you on camera, so I don't need to worry about that. So just if we can get that.
Camera is still on.
Yeah, so just don't log off until we get that. So let's see if I can just block define it. Wait, where? There it is. So first I do the Q&A. Hello.
Cal, you're on the screen, but there you are.
What were you trying to say, Robert?
What I said was, I see you, I hear you. You made a request, I didn't get
Well,
it.
no, I said somebody called on me in the queue of people to answer Peter's questions about alternative ideas. Somebody called on me about fourth or fifth in the queue. Somebody else jumped in to start talking and they never called on me again.
Hello. Yeah. I'm doing.
I didn't see that. So if you'd like to contribute, we'll put it on, we'll keep it
No, I'm going to send my comments to Peter. Oh, who's running this thing on Thursday?
DMPED.
Okay. So Peter, I had a response to a potential alternative to this process. I'm going to email you my thoughts because I didn't get to speak it. You're on mute, Peter.
Do email me, but my suggestion is to send it to all the commissioners.
Okay.
I mean, we're scrambling for.
I know. I mean, the problem is I don't have all the specifics about it. I'm trying to dig up memories from the task force members from 2.5 years ago when we first discovered this other option.
Well, I mean, this thing.
We're all scrambling. We're all scrambling.
So I just think you want to talk to all of the commissioners. So I would just, please do send it to me. But just talking to me is.
Yeah, but I just wanted to speak on the call, and they didn't get called on.
We're doing the best we can here.
Something happened there. Yeah, we went through the same thing, trying to figure out how to save the chat on a webinar last night on the ANC call. So, all right, I'm gonna go.
Don't you go, Robert. Thank you, Cal.
Okay.
I'm still blocked, not finding the Q&A, and then if you can block to find the chat, we can double team.
Well, I just saved the Q&A.
You can see you saved it because I'm still scrolling down it to block to find it.
Yeah, I saved it. I have it in a Word document now.
I'm going to do the same thing. Will you do the chat?
The chat looks like it's gone.
That's not good. I'm looking at it. Hold it. So now
Oh, wait, I see it.
Yeah, I don't think it's gone.
No, it's not gone. All right, I'll try to save the whole chat.
Now I do this. And then I put it here. So that's that. And I'm going to try to do the same thing. So we double team this and have a higher probability. that we don't get. Hold it. What are 15 new messages? Come on, baby.
In ANC Zooms, do all the Q&As show up?
No, they don't. I don't know what.
I think that's a function of Zoom, not a function of our
Yeah.
ability.
But in any case, so what we've done as a fallback is we post it at the time we post the, I can't remember whether it's a.
Yeah, but how do you save it?
What we're doing right now, before we
I
hang
did it a
up.
whole different way. I saved, I copied all of it and then I saved it to a Word document.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. That's what we do, but we post the Word document.
Yeah, that's fine.
Come on. You can get to the bottom of this. I just want both of us to do it.
Okay.
Oh, takes forever.
It looks like there's still a lot of attendees.
Yeah, I know, we're not looking very professional, but it's the only, I didn't dare let you hang up without, this is the chat. This is the chat. Paste. Okay, now I'm gonna save this. Okay.
Chris Otten, are you there?
Yeah, Chris? We ought to have the conversation offline, but he sent me.
I've done all the saving.
Okay, and I have too, so we've double back. So when this comes up on your Zoom, will you send me a copy? What you do is you simply let me. I think if you just send me you'll get something that says cloud. You'll get something from Zoom.
Yeah.
Forward that note to me.
Okay.
So I'll be able to pull down a copy too.
That'll be sometime tomorrow.
Yeah, right. Okay, so are we signing off?
Yeah, I'm going to end it now.
Okay, thank you, everybody.